Law of the sea, baselines, and maritime zones. Imagine a long time ago, people, they probably think that it is enough for them to be on the land for resources, but then along with the increase of need, they wanted to secure more, not only on land, but they started to claim ocean. The bigger the needs, they want the larger ocean. Larger, larger and larger. Land dominates the sea. What does it mean? That the maritime claims depend on sovereignty over coastal territory. So basically, in the simple language, we have ocean or we have maritime areas because we have land. So if you don't have land, you have no entitlement over ocean. That's the basic principle. So land dominates the sea. Now, in general, how and what a coastal state or a state like State A is entitled to based on the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. So this is what we call baseline. Inside the baseline, in the base, for example, it's called internal waters. And then beyond that is territorial sea for 12 nautical miles. And then beyond that is a contiguous zone for 24 nautical miles. We have exclusive economic zone for 200 nautical miles, and then beyond that is continental shelf, which is actually only the seabed. Beyond that does not belong to a coastal state. It is called the area. And the water beyond 200 nautical miles is called the high seas or laut bebas in bahasa Indonesia. So basically what I'm trying to say is that based on the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, coastal states have a different or various maritime zone that they are entitled to. A particular maritime zone, for example, like territorial sea, it covers not only the ocean or the sea, but also the seabed and the airspace above it. Exclusive economic zone, for example, it covers the sea or the water and also the seabed. But for the continental shelf, it covers only the seabed, excluding the water. So it is very important for us to understand how we measure it and what it covers. So, for example, if I ask you what is territorial sea? So territorial sea is maritime zone, the limit of which is 12 nautical miles from baseline, and it covers water, seabed, and also airspace. This is what we call sovereignty or kedaulatan. So land plus 12 nautical miles is kedaulatan or sovereignty. Beyond that is called hak berdaulat or sovereign rights. So it is very important for you to understand the difference between sovereignty and sovereign rights. Now the key question is actually where does the land end and the sea begin? If you talk about the land and the ocean, of course there is a limit, there is a border between them, right? So where does the land end and the sea begin? So this is what we call the baseline. Now this is what we are going to talk about, baselines and maritime zones. Why are baselines important? So from the baseline, we measure the breadth of, for example, territorial sea, exclusive economic zone, continental shelf, and so on. So that is why we need baseline. Second is for the limitation of maritime boundaries. So when, for example, your country is close to other countries, so you need to divide the ocean. That is what we call delimitation. So the baseline is also important to conduct the delimitation. The type of baselines under the Law of the Sea Convention or UNCLOS. Remember, UNCLOS stands for United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. So it is normal baseline, reefs, islands, low tide elevation, strait, mud of rivers, bays, harbor works, combination of methods, and aquapelagic baseline. So basically, there are a number of types of baseline from where coastal state can measure their maritime zones. And the last bit, we will be talking about how to publicize baseline. So for example, if Indonesia has their own or designated their own baseline, they need to also publicize it so the world would understand what Indonesia claimed. So baseline is basically the interface between land and sea. So the line between land and sea is called a baseline. Baseline is basically the edge of garis tepi of land. Now, this is the type of baselines, as I said earlier. So imagine this is land, the red area is land, and this blue is actually ocean. How do we designate our baseline? This is how it works. So this is basically the baseline. If you see here in this part, okay, this actually following the shape of the coast, right? So over here, it actually connect the outermost point of land. This is actually closing the mouth of rivers, if you see here. And then this is connecting small islands. Over here is closing the bays or taluk, and so on and so forth. And here is actually connecting the outer point of outlying islands. Jadi menghubungkan titik-titik terluar, pulau-pulau terluar. So those different type of baselines, we call it first normal baseline. So normal baseline is basically this one. So when the line is following the shape of the coast, it's called normal. Reef, article number 6, this is actually connecting the reefs. Terumbu. Straight baseline, like this one. So basically connecting the outermost point, forming a straight line. So this is called straight baselines. Reefs and bays also here. Bays is basically closing the mouth of bays or penutup mulut teluk over here. And this is what we call aquaplagic baseline. So Article 5, Article 6, Article 7, Article 9, Article 10, 11, 12, and 47. So those are article or pasal-pasal within the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. So now imagine this is the baseline. Okay, from the baseline, this country can start to measure its territorial sea, looking like that, which is 12 nautical miles measured from the baseline. Now, normal baseline. So Article 5 of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea said that normal baseline is basically the land that following the shape of the coast during the low water. The question is that geodetic engineering students, I think you will understand that the the surface of the ocean does not stay there, does not stay there forever in one place. They can go down, they can go up. So the question is that which low water line? Which one are you going to use? Which low water line? Other terms like charts, large scale, officially recognized. So meaning that if you see over here, normal baseline is actually the line during or depicting the low water line, but it doesn't really say what scale are we using. On the map, what scale? On the chart, what scale are we using? There's no specification of scale over here. It only says the large scale. So what is large scale? And there is no number over here. And then officially recognized. So basically normal baseline or a country's normal baseline is its coastline as depicted on the chart that is recognized or officially recognized by that particular country. Which one is the low water line? So we know that this is actually the water. It is called chart datum or low water line. Of course, it can go up to, right? This mean sea level. It is usual datum level for land maps. Jadi kalau peta darat, peta topografi menggunakan ini mean sea level (MSL), and the other water level is actually the high water level. Okay, the question is that which one do you use for your own baseline? Either this one or this one or this one. The answer is the low water line. Why are you using the low water line? Because you want to have as large land as possible. So then you start to measure your maritime zone from the outermost limit or point of your land. So then you can have more ocean basically, right? Now imagine over here, the surface of the ocean does not stay here, right? It can go like that or go like that. So it can be higher, higher, and lower, and lower. So which one are you using for the normal baseline? So the answer is that the lowest possibility. Here's how we are going to measure the maritime zones from a normal baseline. So imagine in the Pasal 3 of UNCLOS, it says this, the breadth of the territorial sea is 12 nautical miles. Okay, so if this is the baseline, if this is the coastline, it will look like that. So this is what we call the envelope of arcs. So this is actually the outer limits of territorial sea that belongs to this particular country. So once again, it is using the envelope of arcs. It is not like that. It is not like copying the coastline and then push it for or drag it for 12 nautical miles. It is not like. So you see the difference here, right? So it is not this one. Okay, ini kalau pakai ini kita rugi banyak nih. Okay, so it is using the envelope of arcs like that. So in our language, it is called buffer. Now, the baselines of atolls or reef. Remember Article 6? So imagine this is actually a small atolls or reef like that over here. Which one are you going to use? Whether this line as the baseline or this one, the green. This is actually, do you think this is actually the procedure or the method which look like that? Or from here, from the low water line of the reef? Is it from the island or from the reef? Because actually this is a small island within the reef. This actually is the answer. So in the case actually, the breadth of the territorial sea is the seaward land water line of the reef. So this is actually the right one. So the outermost line. So instead of from the island, it is actually measured from the reef. Now, once again, I would like to show you baselines of islands. So this is once again the mean sea level. If you see here, you know that it can go down like that for the low water. It can also go up for the high tide. Now, the question is that which one is island? So this and this and this. So this is called island and rock. So the definition of island is actually uh, an object like this, which is always above high tide. So the definition of island is like this. An island is a naturally formed area of land. That's first. So it has to be natural. Okay, it has to be natural. Second, surrounded by water. The third is always above water at high tide. So even during the high tide like this, it is always above it, right? So that's what we call an island or rock. So what is the difference between island and rock then? Island is once again a naturally formed area of land surrounded by water, which is above high tide. So both island and rock actually should have a definition of these three criteria. They have to satisfy these three criteria. But then what is the difference between island and rock? In this case, rock cannot sustain human habitation. Jadi yang namanya karang itu tidak bisa mendukung kehidupan manusia. Kalau dia bisa mendukung, it is called an island or pulau. If it cannot, it's called rock or island. Okay, now imagine this. So if you see now different references, different maps, right? So let's say here is actually your chart datum, or let's say you use MSL over here. If you use the mean sea level, it will look like this. It will look like this. But if you use higher tide, like high tide, it will go up and then the island will go smaller, right? But if you use the low tide, which look like that, of course the island will be bigger. Okay, this is the reason why we use the low tide or even the lowest possibility of tide, because we want to have a bigger islands and we want to have more ocean. Now the straight baselines now. So imagine coastal shape of a country is like this, irregular like this. It is almost impossible for this country to have a normal baseline following the coast like this, right? So instead of claiming the normal baseline, this kind of country can claim straight baseline, which look like that, basically connecting the outermost point of its land territory. So then when you have the straight baseline connecting this point and you will have water inside it, the water is called internal waters or perairan pedalaman. This is perairan pedalaman or internal waters. So how are you going to measure the territorial sea? The territorial sea will be measured from this straight baseline, which look like that. So imagine that's actually 12 nautical miles of line. it is a 12 nautical miles, which means that this is going to be your territorial sea. So pasal 7 di UNCLOS, it says like this, and this is actually the illustration how this procedure or these articles have been implemented. When can you define the straight baseline instead of normal baseline? Here is a criteria. For example, in localities where the coastline is deeply indented and cut into, deeply indented is look like this, okay, irregular. Or if there is a fringe of islands along the coast and its immediate vicinity, the method of straight baseline joining the appropriate points may be employed. What else? Where, because of the presence of the delta and other natural conditions, the coastal state is highly unstable. So if you have unstable coast, you can have a straight baseline instead of normal baseline. Straight baselines can look like this. This is in Norway. This is the implementation of straight baseline by one big country. Now, the third one is bay closing line for baselines, or actually the line that is closing the mouth of bays. If you have bays like this or taluk like this, in theory or by the law, it is possible for you to close this mouth of bays. So then you will consider this as your internal waters or perairan pedalaman. And then the starting point to measure the territorial sea is actually not from this line, not from this normal baseline. Instead, it is from a straight baseline like this. Now, the question is, when can you close the mouth of bays as a baseline? There are two criteria here. First, it has to be no longer than 24 nautical miles. And the second criteria is that the area of this semicircle is smaller than the area of the bay itself. The illustration will look like this. All right. So this closing line has to be smaller or shorter than 24 nautical miles. And then the semicircle, luas setengah lingkarannya, has to be smaller than the area of the base. Jadi luas setengah lingkarannya harus lebih kecil dibandingkan luas teluknya. So in this case, this left base satisfies the two criteria: the length of this bay closing line and the area of its semicircle. So in this case, the left one, you can close the bay. Okay, you can close the mouth of the bay. What about the right one? It looks like this. Yes or no? It is a no. Why? Because it is the first criteria is met, which is the length of the closing line is actually no more than 24 nautical miles. You see the similar over here, the length. But the area of the semicircle over here is actually larger than the area of bay. So it does not meet the second criteria. So it means that you cannot actually close the bay over here. Okay, you cannot close the bay. So your baseline is not this one, not this one. Instead, your baseline is actually the coastline of this bay. So you have to measure your territorial sea from this line. So this is the bay closing line. Now let us implement that bay closing line in different shape of the coast. You can see here, there are a number of bays over here, this one, and a lot of bays. So let us check now which one is the bay that we can close using the bay closing line. Or in other term, we call it a juridical bay atau teluk yuridis. Mana yang teluk yuridis di sini? Yang bisa ditutup dengan garis penutup teluk. Imagine this one. Do you think this is okay? Let us check. The answer is no, because the semicircle of the bay is actually larger than the bay. So you cannot really close this. So it has to be following the shape of the coast over here. What about this one? This one is quite easy. You can close it because it is less than 24 and the semicircle is actually smaller than the entire area of the base, right? What about here? You have a small island, so you can close it using different segments like this, and this. You can check bay closing line. How to check that? How to evaluate that? You basically can have these three, combine it into one, and then try to simulate this semicircle like this. and then you can check the area of the semicircle whether it is actually smaller than the entire base. In this case, it is smaller than this one, right? So it is actually the entire base, and this is smaller. So you can actually close this base using this 1, 2, 3 line. How about this one? Of course, this is what you want, right? The outermost point, the better, because you want to have as large as possible internal waters over here. But the problem is that if this line is longer than 24 nautical miles, you cannot use it, right? You cannot designate the line over here. So what can you do? Of course, you want to change it in such a way to have the line not longer than 24 nautical miles. Let's say it is over here. So this is actually no longer than 24 nautical miles. So you can have it here, but not over here. So meaning now this is your bay closing line. All right, this is your bay closing line. So this is internal waters, but over here is not internal waters because the closing line is over here. So now with this combination, this is actually your baseline. So from here, this is bay closing line. From here again, this is multiple closing line, XYZ over here. 1, 2, and then 3, and then up to here, and then up to here. This is not over here, but this is actually over here because it is not a bay. So then from that, we can measure the 12 nautical miles, which look like that. So this is now your 12 nautical miles of territorial sea based on the combination of baselines over there. What else can we use as a baseline? Is the harbor, permanent harbor works. Jadi kalau ada konstruksi yang di harbor atau pelabuhan dermaga, maka permanent harbor work itu bisa digunakan sebagai baseline. Okay, this, for example, is the baseline in this case. For the purpose of delimiting the territorial sea, the outermost permanent harbor works, which form an integral part of the harbor system, are regarded as forming part of the coast. Offshore installations and artificial islands shall not be considered as permanent harbor work. So anything permanent harbor work, even though it is artificial, you can consider that as a baseline. But if it is offshore installation and artificial island, so you cannot use it as a baseline. Now, the last part is archipelagic states, territorial sea, archipelagic state. Okay, imagine this is actually an archipelagic state atau negara kepulauan. So archipelagic state is another term for negara kepulauan. So for the negara kepulauan like this or archipelagic state, we can connect the outermost point of the outlying islands, which look like this. Okay, this is actually connecting the outermost point of outlying islands. Now, so in the middle over here, it is called archipelagic waters atau perairan kepulauan. So the water enclosed by this archipelagic baseline atau garis pangkal kepulauan, I need to remind you this, the word baselines in bahasa Indonesia is garis pangkal. So this is the archipelagic baseline atau garis pangkal kepulauan connecting the outermost, so basically enclosing the entire archipelago. So the water within it is called archipelagic waters atau perairan kepulauan. And then over here, if you see the teluk or bays over here, you can close it, right? Do you still understand how to close the bay? Of course, you still understand it, right? The length has to be less than 24 nautical miles, and the area has to be smaller than the bay itself. When a country has designated archipelagic baseline like this, it can start to measure the territorial sea, which is like that. It is 12 nautical miles, right? So this is the 12 nautical miles. But if you remember, the territorial sea does not only cover the water, it also covers the seabed and the airspace above it. So this territorial sea does not look like this, it looks like that. So basically up to the airspace over there, 12 nautical miles of territorial sea. So that is archipelagic baselines. Now let us go deeper on the archipelagic baseline. It is actually based on Pasal 47 or Article 47 of the Law of the Sea Convention. A good example of an archipelagic state or archipelagic country is Indonesia. So Indonesia, the Philippines, Fiji, those are actually archipelagic state. So archipelagic state is basically a country or a state consisting of a lot of islands, maybe thousands of islands, like Indonesia, 17,000 islands. That country wants to enclose the entire archipelago and then start to measure its maritime zone from that baseline. Okay, a country like Indonesia can designate archipelagic baseline basically. So in order for a country to have an archipelagic baseline, it has to meet five conditions. Not all the archipelagos is entitled to be an archipelagic state. Jadi tidak semua negara yang terdiri dari banyak pulau itu bisa mengklaim dirinya sebagai negara kepulauan. So they have to meet these five criteria. First, the straight archipelagic baselines joining the outermost point of the outermost islands and drying reefs. That's number one. Number two, the ratio of water to land within the baseline must range from 1 to 1 to 9 to 1. We talk about this later, okay? Number three, the length of any single baseline segment must not exceed 125 nautical miles. Just for your information, the nautical miles in meters is 1,852. Number four, no more than 3% of the total number of baseline segments enclosing the archipelago may exceed 100 nautical miles. Once again, we talk about this later. And number four, such baseline shall not depart to any appreciable extent from the general configuration of the archipelago. Now, let me go one by one. Number one now here. How does it look like? It looks like this. Basically, outermost point of the outermost islands and drying reefs. So let's say this is actually a small island, this is drying reefs. You can enclose the entire archipelago. Okay, that's number one. Now let's go to number two. Just this one. The ratio of water and land within the baseline must range from 1 to 1 to 9 to 1. Okay, water and land, the ratio. So you have to calculate the area of land and area of water. So if you see this one, for example, if you want to calculate the area of land, you need to distinguish between land and water. So it will look like this. So imagine you can collect all the island, so you can measure the total area of land, right? Ini tambah ini, tambah ini, tambah ini, all the total area. You can also calculate the area of water minus land, if you see this. All right? So meaning now you know the total area of land, you also know the total area of water. So the ratio has to be 1 to 1 to 9 to 1. So water to land has to be 1 to 1 to 9 to 1, meaning that the water and land at least has to be the same area. So 1 to 1, right? And maximum, the water is 9 times of this land area. You get the point, yeah? So if you calculate this, all of them, and this, the total area of this blue water, maximum 9 times of this area of land, right? So meaning that the water area must be at least equal to the land area and no more than 9 times greater. So this is number two. So we already covered criteria number one, criteria number two. Now, criteria number three, the length of any single baseline segment must not exceed 125 nautical miles. By the way, once again, we always use the symbol M, the big M over here, not NM. Jadi nautical miles itu disimbolkan dengan M besar, bukan dengan NM. Karena kalau NM nanti jadi nanometer. Kecil sekali dia. So instead of using NM, we use M because NM can be nanometer, which is very short, right? Okay, now the length of any single baseline segment must not exceed 125. We have to measure the length of this single segment like this. Every segment will have their own length, and the longest one cannot or must not exceed 125 nautical miles. Ini nggak boleh lebih dari 125 nautical miles nih, yang paling panjang ya. So that is the longest segment allowed. Of course, you want this, right? You want the line to be connecting this one to this one because you want to have more water. But if the length is, for example, 130, you can draw the line over here because it is more than 125. So you just need to accept this. That's number 3. Now we have number 4. No more than 3% of the total number of baseline segments enclosing the archipelago may exceed 100 nautical miles. If this is actually the segments of line, you can have it maximum 125. You remember that, right? It means it can be more than 100 then, because the maximum is 125. Yes, but if you have the segments line more than 100, you can have it, but only 3% of the segments can be more than 100. Okay, for example, if a state defines 100 baseline segment in total. Jadi kalau kamu misalnya mempunyai 100 segmen totalnya, then no more than 3 of them may exceed 100 nautical miles in length. Oke, kalau punya 100 segmen, maka hanya 3 yang boleh maksimal itu yang melebihi 100. Itu pun nggak boleh lebih dari 125. Tentu saja, karena itu ada kriteria tadi kan. So, can you have more than 100? Yes, you can. Can you have more than 125 nautical miles? No, you cannot. Okay, you can have more than 100 nautical miles, but only 3% of the entire segments. Misalnya kalau segmennya banyak banget, katakan 200, if you have 200 segments, and then you can have 6 segment only with a length of more than 100. So we have covered 4 criteria. Now the 5th criteria. Such baseline shall not depart to any appreciable extent from the general configuration of the archipelago. Now imagine if you have, for example, an island over here, okay, a small island over here, but it is actually very far from your country, but it belongs to you. Of course, you want to have this, right? You want to have that, of course, because you want to have the water to belong to you. The question is that, can you do this? Can you actually draw the line over here? First, this segment line cannot be more than 125. You understand this? This segment line cannot be more than 125. You understand this? But even if this segment is not more than 125, can you do this? Now, if you look at it, such baseline shall not depart to any appreciable extent from the general configuration of the archipelago. So the general configuration of the archipelago. So like this is the general configuration. But if you add this, the configuration can be totally different now, right? So this is considered not satisfying this criteria. So it is actually significantly different from the general configuration of the baseline. So you cannot do this based on this criteria. So this cannot belong to you. So you cannot really have this one. So you have to just be satisfied with this configuration only. So this is your archipelagic baseline configuration. What about this one? So this one, you cannot consider this as part of this, sorry, you cannot have it. But for this one, now, even though this island still belongs to you, so you will consider this island uh, as an island with normal baseline. Jadi kalau ini menggunakan garis pangkal kepulauan, maka pulau kecil ini menggunakan garis pangkal normal aja. Tidak boleh disatukan dia dengan ini, karena negara kepulauannya jadi sangat-sangat berbeda. Now you have this archipelagic baselines. So from these baselines now, you can start to measure your maritime zones. So this is, once again, the internal waters. You can close this bay as long as the length of the bay closing line is not more than 24 nautical miles. And then the area of the semicircle is less than or smaller than the area of this bays. You can do that. Before you have this, all the water here is called archipelagic waters. But now when you close it, it is called internal waters. What are the difference? The difference is you have a stronger control over your internal waters than aquatic waters. We can learn about this later on. Now, you can start to measure your territorial sea, which look like that. 24 nautical miles of contiguous zone. and then 200 nautical miles of exclusive economic zone. And beyond that, what can you have? You can still have a continental shelf that can go beyond 200 nautical miles, which might look like that. Okay, this is now the maritime zones of an archipelagic state. So we have covered almost everything. We have covered all the types of baselines from where we measure the maritime area. And the last one, we also learned a lot and in details about archipelagic baselines, and these are the maritime zones that can be measured from the archipelagic baseline. So internal waters is there, territorial sea, contiguous zone, exclusive economic zone, and continental shelf, including those beyond 200 nautical miles. So when you designated your baseline already, you cannot just stay quiet. You need to publish it. You need to announce it to the world. So basically, when or after you designate your baseline, you need to submit or deposit that to the United Nations. Indonesia, for example, has done that in 2009. So March 2009, Indonesia already submitted or deposited its baseline, the maps, and also the list of coordinates to the United Nations. So then for the other countries to check, if they are not happy, they will say to Indonesia, okay, we are not happy with your baseline, please revise, and so on and so forth. So up to you, basically, if you want to listen to them and if you want to actually revise your baseline based on their proposal. So I think that will be the last slide, how to publicize your baseline. So with that, I thank you very much.